My phone buzzed once. Just one vibration. When I opened it, my wife had sent me a single line that split my life clean in half. "You are not coming with us to Europe. My mother wants this to be a family vacation only." I stared at that message in the same house I paid for, standing beside the suitcases I packed for a trip I planned after sinking $700,000 of my father's inheritance into her failing business to keep her dream alive. And in that moment, between the taste of burnt coffee and the sound of their Uber pulling away, I realized they didn't forget me. They removed me. So I did the one thing none of them ever imagined I would do. I sold the entire engine of her company, and I rented out the house they came home to. My name is Riven, and this is how I stopped being the extra in my own life. I'm about to share something heavy, something I never thought I'd say out loud. But before I do, can you just say hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from? It helps to know someone's out there listening. Even the smallest connection makes a story like this easier to tell. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if my story speaks to you even a little, please consider subscribing. It's just me here trying to make sense of what happened, and your support means more than you know. The morning looked exactly the way I liked it. Quiet, gray, and calm, as if Portland itself was still waking up. I stood barefoot in the kitchen of our suburban home, the smell of freshly ground beans drifting warmly through the room. The espresso machine I bought last year hissed softly, steam rising like a morning ritual I had repeated thousands of times. The counters were clean, the fridge hummed faintly, and the clock above the pantry ticked toward 7:14 a.m. For a few seconds, everything felt as though it was in perfect order. Except for one thing. 3 suitcases sat by the front door, lined up neatly like obedient soldiers waiting for a signal. One was Marissa's, white glossy, plastered with destination stickers. One belonged to Judith and her daughter, matching beige luggage with gold initials. And then there was mine, zipped tight clothes neatly folded inside my passport tucked in the outer pocket. I had double-checked my packing the night before, imagining the 3 of us walking through airports, eating gelato on cobblestone streets, watching sunsets over new cities. This was supposed to be our trip. A celebration. A reward after years of pushing through storms. While I poured my coffee, my phone buzzed against the counter. I didn't rush to look. I assumed it was an airline reminder or another email confirming our restaurant reservations. When I finally reached for the phone, lifting it lazily with my free hand, the screen lit up with her name. Marissa. Just one text message. "You are not coming with us to Europe. My mother prefers this vacation to be a family vacation only." I blinked, read it again, and again. At some point I stopped breathing. The words didn't shout. They were quiet, clean, surgical, sharp in a way that cut deeper because of how effortlessly they slid in. Family vacation only. 2 words suddenly rewrote everything I thought I belonged to. The air in the kitchen thinned. My fingers numbed around the coffee mug. I sat down on the bar stool without realizing I had moved. The world felt muffled, as if someone had pressed a pillow over my ears. I stared at the message until the letters blurred. My suitcase by the door waited without knowing it had been dismissed. I had visualized Europe so vividly, Marissa leaning into me on a gondola in Venice, our hands brushing while taking photos along the Amalfi coast. The 2 of us crossing the Charles Bridge in Prague, wrapped in scarves. I'd imagined this trip would reconnect us after long months of distance, of her being consumed by the company and me being the one keeping everything else steady. Instead, I got a text that made it very clear. In their definition, I was not part of the family. My gaze drifted to the dining table where I'd printed and arranged our travel itineraries in a tidy folder: flight confirmations, hotel bookings, reservation receipts. I'd even scheduled Judith's favorite spa in Rome, something I added behind the scenes to make the trip feel seamless. Every detail, every plan, every piece of this vacation had been my work. But none of it mattered. I set my phone down and leaned back, hearing nothing but the hollow throb inside my chest. I didn't text Marissa back. Instead, questions formed on their own. Why didn't she tell me in person? Why hide behind a message? Why blame her mother when this trip was built? From my time, my effort, and my money. I walked to the front door and stood over the 3 suitcases. Theirs looked ready for a glamorous escape. Mine looked like a joke I'd played on myself. And in that quiet, heavy moment, I felt the truth settle in with a weight that pressed behind my ribs. I was the only one who still believed I belonged here. I don't know what made my memory seize on that moment, maybe the shock, maybe the silence, but my mind drifted back to the hospital room where my father took his last breath. Back then, the air was just as still, just as dense. He had pressed a trembling hand over mine and said, "Promise me you won't hand your whole life to someone who won't stand beside you. Money is only worth something when you use it for a life you actually want." He left me his savings $700,000 he'd built slowly over decades of quiet, relentless work. I dreamed of turning that money into my own future, a cafe bakery in downtown Portland called Rose Corner, a place filled with warm bread and conversation where life moved gently instead of racing past. But life doesn't always move along the lines you draw for it. 3 years ago, Marissa's travel concierge startup was collapsing. Rent on the Pearl District office was overdue, employees were threatening to quit, vendors were sending warning emails. I remember coming home to find her at the kitchen table, her head buried in her arms, shoulders shaking. Judith was on speakerphone, her voice sharp enough to cut. "My daughter cannot fail at this. Riven, you need to do something." I stood there, torn between two voices, my father's quiet caution and Judith's loud insistence that being a husband meant stepping in immediately, unquestioningly. Late that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I opened my laptop. The numbers in my account stared back at me. $700,000, years of my father's sacrifices, years of his warnings. And yet all I could think about was Marissa curled up in that chair saying, "You're my family. I'll never forget it if you help me. This is our future." One click transferred everything. No contract, no ownership agreement, no lawyer. Just trust. Just love, or what I believed love to be. And the company came back to life because of that transfer. They paid debts, retained staff, rebuilt marketing. A year later, Marissa was on the cover of a local magazine, celebrated as a self-made CEO, complete with a glowing article about her resilience. At the launch party, Judith beamed and told her friends Marissa built everything from scratch. I stood in the corner holding a glass of champagne, listening, waiting for anyone to acknowledge the truth. But I wasn't in the story they told. I was just the quiet figure passing hors d'oeuvres between guests. Not long after the first real crack appeared. One evening over dinner, Judith laughed into her phone and said Riven helped a tiny bit at the beginning, but the company is all Marissa's grit. I remember setting my fork down, staring at the table. $700,000 was a tiny bit. Then came the moment I can't forget. Marissa left some company documents on the counter one afternoon. I flipped through them out of curiosity and froze. The LLC registration listed one owner, Marissa Hale. The cap table had one name. The partnership agreement had one signature. Not mine. Why am I not listed anywhere, I asked that night, trying to keep my tone neutral. She shrugged. "You're my husband. You don't need paperwork." And Mom said adding an extra owner complicates taxes. Complicates taxes. Complicates paperwork. Complicates their narrative. For the first time, unease settled under my skin, not loud or dramatic, but steady and cold. A quiet awareness that I had given them the ground beneath their feet, and somehow, somewhere along the way, they had built walls tall enough to hide me behind. By the time I returned to the present, still standing beside the suitcases at the door, the final piece of the truth clicked into place. My $700,000 had become the foundation of a company that erased me. And now, with one text, they had erased me from the family too. I used to tell myself every family had its quirks, that the tension around Judith's dining table was just strong personalities, not warning signs. But looking back, the signs had been there all along, loud and clear in ways I chose to ignore. I still remember last Thanksgiving. The house was full, the table heavy with food Judith insisted on cooking, even though she criticized everyone else's kitchen. She raised a glass and announced how proud she was of Marissa painting her as a one-woman empire. When I chimed in about potential expansion into experience-based travel, Judith didn't even let me finish. Riven talks too much, she said lightly, as if it were a joke. Men should focus on real money, not little hobbies. The table laughed. Marissa smiled and changed the subject. She didn't touch my knee under the table, didn't give me a look that said, "I've got you." She just moved on, and I felt something in me dim a little. I didn't push back. I swallowed it, convincing myself it wasn't worth ruining the holiday. The same pattern bled into travel planning. When I first suggested Europe, everyone acted thrilled. Judith even told me she was impressed by my itinerary draft. They added me to a group chat so logistics could flow easily, but over time the chat went quiet. Marissa would glance at her phone and smile at something, yet my notifications stayed still. When I asked about hotel confirmations, she said Mom wants to pick. She has better taste. When I asked about flights, she said, "We'll handle it. You don't need to worry." What I didn't realize was that they weren't just planning the trip without me, they were planning how to remove me. One night, Lennox slid a phone across the table at the bar, his eyes steady. "You need to see this," he said. I picked it up and froze. It was a screenshot of a group chat named Hale Family, Europe Trip. Members Judith, Marissa, her sister, no me. Thread after thread filled the screen. Hotel options, outfit coordination, spa bookings. Comments like, "Finally, a real family trip, and it'll be nice not having extra noise." The message that burned the most came from Judith. "We'll tell Riven last minute if needed. He'll understand it's a Hale thing." And Marissa replied, "He might be hurt, but he'll get over it. He always does." I handed the phone back carefully as though it were something fragile. My chest felt both hollow and tight. For the first time, the truth wasn't wrapped in politeness or excuses. It was written plainly in the words they never expected me to see. But the betrayal didn't stop with the trip. Later that night, unable to sleep, I opened old emails and contracts for the company documents I had stored without thinking much of them. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Payment gateways, CRM tools, domain registration, even the hosting plan for the website, they were all under my name. They relied on my credit when Marissa's scores were too low. The business engine that kept her company running was built on my identity, my accounts, my money. And yet the story they told the world erased me completely. The more I pieced together, the more I felt something shifting inside. Not anger, not yet. More like clarity. Instead of asking myself what I'd done wrong, I started asking why I had let myself be treated this way for so long. Why I'd allowed them to define my worth while standing on what I had built. I read Marissa's text again, family vacation only, and for the first time it didn't make me feel small. It made me aware. There is a difference between being excluded and finally seeing the truth behind the exclusion. For years I accepted the crumbs of belonging. Now I finally saw the table for what it was, and who it was never set for. That night, after they left for Europe without a single word to my face, the house felt unnervingly silent. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint thrum of the heater and the emptiness of a space that no longer felt like home. I heard the wheels of their suitcases roll across the driveway hours earlier, heard the car doors shut, and then nothing. Not a knock on my door, not a goodbye, not even a courtesy explanation. The phone lay face down on the nightstand. Midnight glowed on the clock, mocking the idea that sleep might be possible. I didn't cry. My eyes were dry, almost painfully so. Instead, my mind replayed everything: the $700,000, the hidden group chat, the text message that dismissed me like an afterthought. For years, I had made excuses for them. But lying there, I realized I had been cushioning their choices with my silence. The thought came slowly, but deliberately. Maybe the real question wasn't what I had done wrong, but why I kept convincing myself their behavior was normal. By morning, something inside me felt different, tired but clear. Instead of calling Marissa or sending a long message demanding an explanation, I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and typed "Family Law Attorney Portland." Then, after a moment of hesitation, I typed another name: Celine Carter. The attorney Lennox once mentioned in passing, the one who had a reputation for dismantling manipulative financial arrangements inside marriages. I sat at the dining table staring at her website, weighing two versions of myself: the husband who waited patiently for everyone to come home, and the man who finally wanted to understand his legal reality instead of clinging to emotional promises. So I called Lennox first. He picked up almost instantly, as if he'd been expecting it. I told him everything, the message, the group chat he'd shown me, the years of supporting the company without a name anywhere on the paperwork. When I finished, he didn't offer sympathy. He offered honesty. "You poured your father's entire legacy into someone else's dream," he said calmly. "Not as a partner, but as a resource they thought they could control. And now they've pushed you out of the one thing you thought you still belonged to. If you stay quiet now, you're giving them permission to keep rewriting the story." Then he told me something that made my stomach tighten. He had heard through someone at the bank that months after Marissa received the $700,000, Judith had asked about ways to protect the Hale family's assets from marriage complications. Marriage complications. I was the complication. That was the moment I decided I needed answers that didn't come from Marissa. I grabbed my coat, got in the car, and drove north. The drive to Seattle was long, and gray rain streaking across the windshield in slow diagonal lines. I barely registered the radio playing. My thoughts were louder than anything outside the car. By the time the Seattle skyline appeared through the mist, I felt like I'd peeled away the last layers of denial. Celine's office sat in a glass building overlooking the water, modern and sharp. I felt strangely out of place walking through the pristine lobby, as if stepping into a version of life I'd never allowed myself to imagine. When she greeted me, a woman with clear eyes and a demeanor that made the room feel smaller, I knew I was in the right place. I told her everything: the inheritance, the desperate night when Marissa begged for help, the transfer of all $700,000 without a contract, the business infrastructure I had built, the group chat, the message disinviting me from the trip I planned. I spoke for nearly an hour without stopping. Celine listened, occasionally taking notes, occasionally nodding but never interrupting. When I finished, she began sorting through the documents. I had brought the lease, the vendor agreements, the website registrations. Her conclusion was unsettling in its simplicity. Legally, I was the backbone of the entire business. The lease existed because of my credit. The software subscriptions and vendor payments were tied to my accounts. The digital assets were secured under my email. Marissa owned the name, but I owned the infrastructure that made that name worth anything. And once again, I felt the strange duality of my life, essential behind the scenes, invisible everywhere else. Then Celine asked a question I had never allowed myself to consider. "Do you want to take control of what you built?" she said. "Or do you want to remove your support completely and let the company collapse without it?" Two paths. Two very different futures. I had always been the person who tried to preserve harmony, even at my own expense. But harmony built on erasing myself wasn't harmony at all. "I don't want revenge," I said slowly. "I want clarity. I want them to understand what happens when the person they call an outsider stops holding everything together." She nodded, already outlining possibilities, strategies, next steps, with a precision that felt like someone finally turning on a light in a room I'd been stumbling through for years. Walking out of her office, I felt the ground under me change. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just reacting. I wasn't waiting. I wasn't apologizing for existing. I was planning. And for once, the plan was mine. Driving back to Portland from Seattle felt different this time, as if the road itself had shifted into a straight line toward clarity. The sky was dimming, neon signs flickering across the freeway, and somewhere between Olympia and home I began piecing together the company's skeleton in my mind. Not the polished image Marissa showcased online, the real structure beneath it. Who owned what? Who actually held power? Who was just posing in front of the storefront while someone else kept the lights on? When I stepped into the house, it felt smaller than I remembered. Every object inside, every piece of furniture, every appliance, every detail had somehow always been attributed to Judith's good taste, even though I was the one who researched, bought, and assembled most of it. I wandered toward the drawer where we kept important documents. The house deed was there, slipped between tax forms and receipts. And when I read it, something inside me settled. The only name on the deed was mine. I had placed the down payment from my father's inheritance. Judith might have made comments, chosen curtains, or critiqued the sofa, but legally the house was mine alone, no matter how loudly she talked about the Hale family home. That realization carried me into a conversation with Lennox later that night at a small bar downtown. We sat in a corner booth lit by a dim red lamp, my laptop between us. I told him everything Celine had revealed, that behind all the branding and curated photos, I was the legal backbone of the company. He didn't react with shock. He simply nodded and said, "Then stop trying to get fairness by asking for it. Pull the plug. Let reality settle itself." We started drafting a plan right there. First, we listed all the systems tied to my accounts, payment processors, the booking dashboard, vendor contracts, software subscriptions. Then we mapped out the steps needed to shift my name off debts while retaining control over assets. It wasn't sabotage. It was extraction. Clean. Precise. When I got home, I opened my office door, sat down, and began accessing everything I still technically owned. Account after account logged in successfully. And then I noticed something almost absurd. Every recovery email, authentication number, backup, key, and security line pointed back to me. Marissa had never changed a single thing. She simply assumed I would always be there to fix whatever went wrong, quietly and visibly. It was strangely liberating to realize they had built their future on the assumption that I would stay frozen in place forever. A few days later, Celine connected me with a corporate travel conglomerate in the middle of a major expansion. They didn't want Marissa's brand. They wanted an engine, an existing functioning operational core they could adopt quickly. I met with them over a video call, explaining each system, how the pipelines worked, how data synced across booking channels. The COO on the other end of the call raised an eyebrow when Marissa's name came up. He mentioned they'd once considered a partnership with her but pulled out because she didn't play well with collaborators and escalated conflicts too quickly. That was the moment I understood that the glossy version of Marissa's reputation wasn't universal. I proposed a clean structure. They purchased the operational infrastructure, client systems, vendor relationships, while leaving the brand name untouched. No lawsuits, no battles. I didn't want her spotlight. I wanted my work back. Celine emphasized patience, so I paced myself. I began closing unnecessary subscriptions tied to my cards, lowering credit limits on business accounts, and preparing transfer documents so that once the sale was finalized, everything would move smoothly. The only person who wouldn't be prepared was Marissa. One evening, while Lennox and I reviewed notes at my house, he looked around the living room and said, "If you really want out, you should stop letting this place be the Hale family stage." He suggested something bold, listing the house as a luxury rental while they were away. I hesitated, but when I opened the booking calendar and saw the week of their return glaring back at me, something clicked. Lennox asked quietly, "If someone books that week, would you let them?" I didn't answer aloud. But the moment I hit publish on the rental listing, a quiet shift happened inside me. For the first time, I wasn't asking for a place in the story. I was writing my own. A few days later, I was sitting at my temporary workspace when Celine called. Her tone was clipped efficient. "They've accelerated the timeline," she said. The travel conglomerate wanted to finalize the acquisition immediately to align with a strategic launch. By noon, I was reviewing the final agreement. We signed everything digitally. I transferred domain rights, vendor relationships, and operational systems over to the new owners. They wired the payment directly into my account. Moments later, another notification appeared. Marissa had paid for a high-end dinner in Venice on the secondary card linked to my personal account. I stared at the notification for a long moment, not with anger, but with an odd sort of calm. She had no idea that the invisible support beneath her life had already changed hands. Meanwhile, the rental listing for my house blew up. A tech startup team from San Diego messaged me. They wanted the entire week that perfectly overlapped with the Hale family's planned return. They needed space for a networking retreat, requested access to the backyard and grill. I replied simply, as long as they respected the property, they could treat the house as their own. We signed the rental agreement within hours. Afterward, I packed only essentials into a few boxes, books. I loved the espresso gear, some of my father's things. I rented a minimalist apartment downtown overlooking the river. Moving felt strangely light, as if I'd been carrying a house-sized weight on my shoulders without realizing it. While packing, I found an old handwritten letter from my father tucked inside a dusty folder. His words felt eerily timed. "Life isn't about being the support beam under someone else's tower. You deserve to stand in the center of your own story." That letter settled any lingering guilt. On the first night the startup team arrived, I handed them the keys and walked through the house with them. They treated the space with more warmth and intention in an hour than Judith ever had in years. Later, Lennox and I drove past the street. The house was lit up, laughter spilling from the patio, music drifting into the cool evening air. It looked alive for the first time, not staged for Hale family optics. Then my phone buzzed again. Another bank alert. A private car service in Prague. Spa charges. More luxury expenses, all pulled from the same card Marissa hadn't realized was no longer guaranteed. I opened the banking app and quietly tapped Disable Card. Then I disabled the secondary line. Then the third. It took less than 30 seconds. Years of enabling undone with a few taps. That night, while sipping coffee in my new apartment, I checked social media out of habit. Marissa's sister had posted a story, heading home early. Can't wait to sleep in our bed again, accompanied by a boarding pass for a flight arriving 2 days ahead of schedule. I glanced at the rental calendar. The startup team had paid for and legally secured the house for that entire week. Lennox called. So he asked, "Are you going to warn the tenants or warn them?" I took a long breath. "I'm not warning anyone," I said. "Everyone made their choices. The tenants booked the house legally. They're allowed to be there. And if Marissa and Judith chose to fly home early, then they'll arrive to whatever their choices bring them. For once, I wasn't responsible for protecting them from consequences. I wasn't cleaning up messes. I wasn't smoothing things over. I wasn't the buffer that made their lives conflict-free." I sat by the window of my new apartment, looking out over the quiet lights of downtown Portland, and understood that the impact was coming, not because I forced it, but because I finally stepped out of the way. The next chapter of my life was already waiting, and this time I would be the one walking through the door, not standing outside it. I was wiping down the espresso machine in my new apartment when my phone lit up. Lennox sent a single screenshot, Marissa's sister filming her suitcase on the baggage carousel with the words, "Back in Portland, finally." I stared at it for a moment, then at the clock. They'd be at the old house in about 30 minutes. The house they still believed was waiting for them. The house that on paper was now a short-term rental occupied by 7 tech founders. But something had changed in me. Instead of panic, I felt an odd steadiness, a clarity, as if I had finally stopped running behind them begging to be acknowledged and had taken my first step back into my own life. Lennox and I drove to the neighborhood and parked on the corner. Lights glowed through the windows. Laughter rose from the porch. Someone dragged a cooler across the driveway. For the first time in years, the house looked alive, not posed, not curated, not staged for Judith's bragging rights. Alive. "You okay?" Lennox asked quietly. For once I said, "I think I am." A black SUV pulled up. The Hale family spilled out, Judith first, in a silk travel set, sunglasses still on despite the cloudy evening. Marissa behind her, tired but holding herself stiffly. Her sister filming until she realized strangers were lounging on the porch drinking beer. 3 identical expressions froze on their faces, confusion melting into offense. Judith stomped up the steps. "What is happening? Why are there strangers in my daughter's home?" The lead renter, Kenny, came out holding a printed copy of the lease. "We rented this place for the week from a man named Riven Rowe." Marissa blinked hard. "No, that's impossible. This is our house." Kenny calmly tilted his phone toward her booking confirmation, my name, the rental dates, his deposit receipt. Her sister's eyes darted to the entryway, no shoes of mine lined up by the door, no familiar coats hanging on the rack. Nothing of me remained. "Where's Riven?" she asked. I stepped out of Lennox's car and walked toward them, not rushing, not apologizing. Marissa's face flickered with relief. Old instincts, assuming I'd smooth everything over for them. But I stopped at the sidewalk. "There's no mistake," I said. "The house is legally rented. They have full rights until their checkout date." Judith spun toward me, furious. "You can't, this is outrageous." Kenny lifted a hand. "Ma'am, if you try to enter, we'll have to call the police. This is a legal rental." For years, Judith had commanded every space she walked into. Now a stranger, not me, was blocking her at the door. And for once, I didn't feel small watching her rage. I felt free. I pulled a folder from my jacket and handed it to Marissa. "Read this." Inside the transfer documents, the sale confirmation, the legality of every system I once maintained. Her eyes scanned the pages quickly. Color drained from her face. Judith grabbed the papers, flipping through them like she expected the text to rearrange itself into something less catastrophic. The entire operational infrastructure, I said evenly, has been sold. You still have the brand name if you want it, but that name no longer runs anything. Marissa's voice wavered. You sold my company, I met her eyes. You built the front. I built the foundation. And then you removed me from the definition of family with one text message. Don't act surprised that I stopped holding up your house when you told me I didn't belong in it. Judith tried to talk over me, but I held firm. You wanted a family-only vacation, I said softly. I'm simply honoring the role you assigned me, an outsider. Then I handed them the rental contract. For the next 4 days, this isn't your home. Judith pushed forward, but Kenny stepped in firm. Ma'am, please don't trespass. They weren't used to being told no, and they certainly weren't used to being told no by someone besides me. I turned away, and for the first time since marrying into that family, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I felt like I was walking back toward myself. The next morning, my phone overflowed, calls, voicemails, emails, all demanding my attention. Marissa's messages were desperate. Please, Riven, answer. We can fix this. You're taking things too far. Judith sent 2 emails within minutes of each other, one threatening legal action, the next begging for a reasonable family discussion. Her sister texted a long paragraph claiming none of this was intentional, that I had misread everything. I didn't reply. I forwarded everything to Celine. Let the law handle what emotions had distorted for too long. That week, I drove to Seattle again to sign formal separation papers. Celine showed me a memo from the travel conglomerate, a full assessment of why they wanted only the infrastructure, not the leadership. High emotional volatility, reactive decision-making, strained relationships with partners. They had seen what I refused to see. Love had blinded me to it. Business saw it instantly. Back in Portland, the renters checked out, leaving the house cleaner than when they arrived. A few potted plants, a thank you note on the counter. I stood in the doorway of the place I once imagined raising children in, and felt nothing pulling me back. I hired a property management firm and turned the house into a long-term rental. It would no longer be a shrine to expectations I could never meet. While I was locking up, the neighbor waved me over. We all heard what happened the night they came back, she said. Good for you. Some people need to be told no the hard way. I smiled, realizing I didn't have to explain myself. The truth had a way of leaking into the world on its own. With the past finally unhooked from me, I turned toward the dream I'd buried years ago, a small cafe, warm wood and exposed brick, the smell of fresh pastries, sunlight falling across clean counters. I rented a storefront in the creative district and built Rose Corner. At the heart of the cafe, I placed my espresso machine. On the wall, I hung a black and white photograph of my father and framed one of his final lines to me. You deserve to stand at the center of your own story. On opening day, the first person to walk in wasn't Lennox, it was a former employee of Marissa's. She'd gotten the email about the system transfer and quit immediately. I want to work where people acknowledge who actually builds things, she said. I hired her on the spot. A week later, during a gentle drizzle, Marissa walked through the door. No expensive coat, no sharp edges. Just a woman who looked like everything she held had slipped through her fingers. She ordered a coffee but didn't drink it. I never thought you would do something like this, she whispered. We were supposed to be a team. We were, I said. Until you decided I wasn't part of the family. She insisted she only wanted a break, that she needed space from stress, that she never intended for things to go this far. I listened without interrupting. I owed her that much. But when she finally asked, can we start over, I answered honestly, I didn't walk away to punish you. I walked away to stop losing myself. Some things break so quietly you don't notice until it's too late. And we can't rebuild from pieces we never acknowledged. She looked at my father's photo, then said something that surprised me. Mom told me never to put your name on anything. She said men can run off with half of everything. I listened to her instead of trusting you. The words hit harder than anger ever could. I'm not taking anything that's yours, I said. I'm taking back what was mine. She wiped her eyes, nodded, and left. She didn't look back. That night, Lennox stopped by. You look different, he said. I feel different. I looked around my cafe, the warm lights, the quiet hum, the small space built with my hands and my choices. I lost money, years, illusions, I said. But I stopped losing myself. That's worth more than anything I gave up. I closed the shop, turned off the lights, and stepped into the calm Portland night. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't heading back to a life where I was an accessory to someone else's story. I was heading home to mine.